The flames did not grant mercy. They rose slow at first, crackling through straw and timber, then surged upward with terrible hunger. The woman bound to the stake could not move. Iron chains bit into her chest as smoke twisted into the gray Parisian sky. And then the screaming began. Her name was Jeanne de Brigue. The year was 1391, and she would become the first recorded woman burned alive for witchcraft in the history of France. Paris, in the late 14th century, was a city drowning in fear. The 100 Years' War had bled the land dry. The Black Death had emptied entire streets. Corpses piled in alleyways, and children died in their mothers' arms. When people could not explain their suffering, they searched for someone to blame. Whispers of demons spread through taverns and chapels. The church declared that Satan walked among them. The courts grew hungry for confessions, and anyone who practiced the old ways, healers, fortune-tellers, charm-makers, became a target. Jeanne had once been tolerated, even trusted. She was a soothsayer, gifted in finding lost things and easing broken hearts. A parish priest had once sought her help to recover a stolen silver cross. She found it, and he thanked her. But the world was changing, and tolerance was turning to terror. In the summer of 1390, 2 women were arrested in Paris for crafting love potions. They were tortured until they confessed to serving demons, then dragged to the square and burned alive. The crowd watched in horror as their bodies twisted in the flames. It was the first witch execution the city had ever witnessed. Jeanne knew what was coming, but desperation makes people reckless. Her neighbor, Massette de Rouilly, was losing her husband. He no longer looked at her the way he once did. Jeanne, too, ached for something she could not have. The father of her children refused to marry her. 2 women, bound by loneliness and longing, decided to take fate into their own hands. By candlelight, they performed a forbidden ritual. 3 toads were tortured. A wax doll was melted, embedded with strands of Massette's husband's hair. The enchantment was meant to bind his wandering heart. In return, Massette taught Jeanne a love charm of her own. For 9 nights, she was to rub melted wax onto her lover's bare back as he slept. By the 10th night, his soul would be hers forever. Perhaps, in that flickering darkness, they believed they had seized control. But secrets have a way of escaping. A neighbor may have overheard. A trusted friend may have betrayed them. However it happened, word reached the authorities. The provost of Paris, Jeanne de Folleville, ordered their arrest. Before dawn, soldiers smashed through Jeanne's door. She was torn from her children and dragged into the night in chains. At Le Châtelet prison, the stone walls wept with moisture. Rats scurried across the floor. Jeanne found Massette already there, eyes wide with terror. They were thrown into separate cells to await trial. In late October 1390, the tribunal convened. The courtroom was cold and silent. The charges were read: witchcraft, heresy, devil worship. Jeanne pleaded through tears that she meant no harm, that she only wanted love. But the judges had already decided her fate. To extract a full confession, they turned to torture. Jeanne was dragged into a windowless chamber beneath the courthouse. The executioners stripped her to a thin shift and bound her wrists behind her back with rope. The rope was attached to a pulley on the ceiling. With a sharp tug, her body was hoisted into the air, her shoulders dislocated with a sickening pop. The scream that erupted from her throat echoed through the dungeon. They let the rope slacken, then yanked it tight again. Her body jerked violently. Bones ground against tendons. Agony exploded through every nerve. She could endure no more. Sobbing, broken, Jeanne confessed. She told them her godmother had introduced her to a demon named Hausebut. She said she had renounced Christ. She swore allegiance to darkness in exchange for power. Whether any of it was true no longer mattered. The confession was all they needed. Massette, under the same torture, gave a similar story. The court declared them guilty. The sentence was death by burning. On August 19, 1391, Jeanne was dragged from her cell into blinding sunlight. Her head had been shaved, a mark of shame. She and Massette were tied to a wooden cart and paraded through the streets. Crowds gathered, some hurled stones, others crossed themselves in fear. The cart rolled slowly toward the Place du Marché aux Pourceaux, the market square turned execution ground. 2 tall stakes stood waiting, piles of tar-soaked wood surrounding each one. Soldiers prodded Jeanne forward and chained her to the stake. Iron links wrapped around her torso and limbs until she could barely breathe. Nearby, Macette wept as she was bound to her own pyre. A priest stepped forward, holding a crucifix high. He shouted for them to repent. Through tears, Jeanne prayed aloud. She begged God for mercy. She called out for her children. Then the executioners approached with torches. The first flame touched the straw at her feet. Smoke curled upward. The fire was small at first, hesitant, almost gentle. Jeanne felt the heat rising against her legs. For one fleeting moment, she may have hoped it would be quick. It was not. The flames surged. A wall of fire roared to life. It climbed her legs, igniting her skirt. Blisters formed and burst in seconds. Jeanne threw her head back and screamed a sound so raw, so primal, it silenced the crowd. The fire consumed her clothes, then her skin. Her flesh blackened and split. Fat melted and dripped into the flames, hissing and popping. The smell was unbearable. Some in the crowd turned away. Others vomited. But most stood frozen, unable to look away from the horror they had helped create. Jeanne's screams grew weaker. Her body convulsed against the chains. Her movements slowed. Her head drooped forward. And then, silence. At the next stake, Macette had already gone still. The flames continued to burn long after the women had ceased to suffer. When the fire finally died, only charred remains clung to the stakes. The crowd dispersed in eerie silence, carrying with them the image of what happens to those who defy the order of things. For the authorities, it was a victory. Fear spread through Paris like wildfire. Wise women and healers vanished into the shadows. No one dared practice the old ways. Jeanne's children were left motherless, burdened with the shame of their mother's death. Jeanne de Brigue's execution marked the beginning of a dark era. In the centuries that followed, thousands would be accused of witchcraft and burned alive. But she was the first in France a warning, a lesson written in ash and agony. She was not a monster. She was desperate, heartbroken, human. And for that, she was destroyed. History remembers her name, but it rarely asks the harder question: how many in that crowd knew she was innocent? How many stood silent, terrified that speaking out would put them on the next pyre? Fear does not only burn witches, it burns the truth, and sometimes it burns us all.